are now tuned in to this week's episode on TOGCast. It is our mission to bring you guest speakers sharing their latest and greatest tips, skills, stories and know-hows within their market. Let's get going.
Hello and welcome to TOGCast. Today we are joined by Anne Williams and Jen Richardson, and we are doing a two-part series on the perfect recruitment process. The first part will look at the candidate journey before they start, talk about CVs, feedback, interviews and offers. And the second part will be once they start, onboarding, aftercare and offboarding if that comes. We basically want to talk about, how to keep the candidate engaged, communication throughout, and how to provide the perfect onboarding process. So, hello, Anne and Jen.
Hello.
Hello again. Welcome back. So, where would you like to start with the perfect recruitment process? Should we start with CVs?
Yep. Sounds like a good place to start.
Always. So, have you got any tips for, clients that have put a job out there and all of a sudden they've got 100 CVs in? Like, where do they start? How do they sift through them?
It's a tough one. I would say use an agency and then you won't have that problem.
I love that.
Exactly. It is, we do get people saying to us, wish we'd used you. We've had hundreds of applications through LinkedIn and none of them are any good. And that's where we're like, okay. I recently had someone saying, Jen, next time I'm coming to you. I can't deal with all of these. So, yeah, I can imagine for hiring managers, that's a massive amount of it.
Is it quite regular that they'll get quite a few CVs, or is there like an average of about, 10, 20 per role?
Depends on the role. If it's a more, for want of a better way of putting it, generic role, you are going to get multiple CVs. If you're advertising for a remote role, you will be inundated with CVs. So it really depends on how you're advertising the position, and it's having certain criteria perhaps that are essential. So if you decide not to use us, would you? You can put certain criteria on a job board and say this is essential, whether it's experience of a certain scientific process or in finance, a certain sort of software platform. You can, if they don't have that, they can have an auto reject function. But the trouble is with that is it is very nameless and faceless. And the reason, I know I keep going back to using us, but the reason why you use an agency is that we see past the CV. But for some roles and in some areas, you will have multiple CVs sent. So I think you need to be very aware of how long you have an advert running, not have it running for too long, because also that can look as if a client is either desperate or hasn't found the right person. Maybe they've been looking for ages, perhaps they've had somebody leave. It can imply that that a company is perhaps not operating their CV process quite as slickly, I think that's the word, as they should do. So I wouldn't leave a job out advertised for too long. If you're getting multiple CVs, close it down quickly.
Okay, so a couple of questions there. Firstly, should clients be replying to every CV that they get to make the applicant know that their application's been received?
It is nice to have an acknowledgement of some sort. Again, as Anne said about being a little bit faceless, just having an automated response. As a minimum, it's better than nothing. It's also giving the candidate some kind of expectation when they can expect to hear back. If that's a week or 10 days or a couple of days. It's just a thank you very much and all part of the candidate experience that we have to do that as a minimum.
And I guess they could also say if you don't hear back, unfortunately, you've been unsuccessful, and then they don't need to necessarily then feedback if that applicant is unsuccessful. And the second thing is that if they do have a lot of CVs to sift through, going on the point you said earlier, Anne, would you say that the main thing that's important about that job board, that's what they use to sift through the CVs, to only pull out that criteria, that they have that skill set or they have that experience?
If they're faced with that many, say, hundreds of CVs, which you hear of happening, then they are going to have some hard and fast rules that they will stick by and say, this person hasn't got SAP experience, so unfortunately they're on the no pile. Obviously, these are theoretical piles these days, but I think that somebody has to have certain ways of using the word sifting, going through things, but there is a danger that you miss out on the perfect person because, to my mind, not having SAP as an example isn't necessarily going to mean they can't learn it. And somebody's proclivity to learn a system is something that you will be able to establish when you have that conversation. So the sifting through CVs is the first stage of probably a 3-stage process at least. So if you're going through 100 CVs and you're saying, right, 30 people have got SAP, 70 people haven't, those 70 people, pound to a penny, you'll have rejected good 10 people who are really, really good candidates who on the face of it don't have what they supposedly need, but also do candidates put everything on their CV that they supposedly have in their repertoire? No.
Well, that's another question. How long should a CV be? If candidates might have loads of experience and skill sets and, be versed in lots of software, but only have a small space and not sure what to add on it. So
the sort of CVs that Anne would read and the sort that I would read being in the scientific team were going to be very, very different. I mean, my candidate CVs are often 6-7 pages long because you've got publications on there and things like that. So they're generally going to be a lot longer. The 2-page CV is a bit of an old wives' tale.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to that at all.
Yeah, there's actually a story behind that when back in the olden days, probably even before our time, and when we used to have to fax CVs across to clients. The reason for the 2 sides of A4 paper was actually because you were only hoping that your client had a couple of pieces of paper in the fax machine and they'd actually be able to print off the CV. But now, obviously, we've got it all digitally. That's not an issue anymore. So I would say to candidates, in terms of getting all of those skills in, I would rather read a 4-5 page CV than have one which has been condensed or squashed into this little space and so difficult to read and such a tiny little font.
Oh, that's really good feedback, actually, for anyone out there that has been trying to squeeze everything in. So what about the timing for the CV stage then? Because if you have got 100 CVs and you've closed off the advert, how long do you wait to go back to these applicants from when they've actually first applied?
Wherever possible, I would never wait until the closing date. If you've got people who look really good, act on them now. Yes, there's a closing date for a reason because you have to have a cut-off point. But just because somebody's applied and they've got what appears to be the perfect CV, don't wait 2 weeks because the closing date's the 30th of March. Speak to them on the 15th of March.
So don't wait until you get all the applicants through and you've got
because the good people, there's a very good chance those people will have gone from the market. And also, there's nothing wrong with showing that you actually are really engaged with that person and say, yes, we've got a closing date, but your CV stood out so much that we didn't want to wait and we wanted to say to you, we really like your details. We'd like to get you booked in for a first stage interview. I think people are still what draw people to businesses, and having that interaction, not doing it on an email, not using an automated platform where at all possible, makes all the difference. And if that candidate's got a couple of processes going on, but they've had a really good first call with somebody who says, we're 2 weeks early, but we love your CV. We really want to show you that we want to have you as part of our process. That person may say, well, okay, I've got 2 interviews, but I'm still going to wait and see what the one group have got to say because they've gone above and beyond and actually called me before the technical closing date.
Yeah.
So don't sit around.
Definitely not. Get in there early.
So is that the case for many clients, do you think? Do you think some clients have like a process where they have to wait until the interview stage after? Yeah. So you're saying maybe try and be as flexible as possible and scrap the process if.
There are certain places where it is required. In the public sector, they often have closing dates that they have to stick to for equal opportunities. But even then, if possible, sometimes a client will come back to me and say, look, we can't officially do anything until the end of the month, but we know that we want to see this person. And I can have an off-the-record conversation with them and say, please bear with us because this is going to be a positive outcome. But most companies put a closing date on because they want to have, okay, we want to be able to look at everybody by the end of March. But if you've been inundated with 100 CVs, you don't need that 30th of March closing day. Just see people, react to them, speak to the good people, tell the people that aren't suitable, thank you, but no. Don't keep people hanging on, because you are playing with people's lives to some extent, albeit you've set out your stall. It doesn't do any harm to overachieve.
We are led by hiring managers, and when they can look at CVs, and often they have very, very busy day jobs, which is not always easy getting them to review CVs as quickly as we'd like them to, or of course candidates applying directly. They're going into that same queue as well, and it does slow down the process sometimes.
So feedback then on CVs, if there isn't the automated email that says if you don't hear back, you've been unsuccessful, what's your advice there then for giving people feedback on their CVs, how to do it? You said about calling. Would you call people to tell them they haven't been successful?
In an ideal world, you would do that. But in real life, face of the 100 applications, that's not possible. But there's nothing wrong. An automated email, everybody can spot an automated email. So you've got the acknowledgement of application, but there is nothing wrong with having another email that you can send out, which is a tad more personalised, which can say, thank you so much, not just thank you for your interest, unfortunately, on this occasion. You can invite people to ask for individual feedback, but you can't promise that you're going to do it. But you have to realise that people's time is precious in all walks of life, whether it's on the receiving end of the CVs or the candidate side of it, because many a time a candidate sends me their CV, I submit it to the client, and then when it comes to the client saying they want to see that candidate, the candidate never comes back to me because they found something. So both sides of the fence, but if you can send something that's slightly less automated and robotic, that goes down a treat. But people are aware that in this day and age we are in a digital world where it usually is notification and receipt of thank you but no. But the biggest bugbear I see of candidates these days is that they get no acknowledgement. So they'll have the acknowledgement that they've received the application, but thereafter nothing, or even worse, they've had a first stage screening with the talent team or something, and then they've never been told that they haven't been progressed to the next stage. Now that, if you go to that first stage screening process, you should always have a personalised email at the very least saying, thank you, but on this occasion we're not going to be progressing your details further. If there is constructive feedback as to why, then brilliant. But you cannot leave somebody after having that engagement with the business directly thinking, well, I guess 3 weeks later I'm not of interest to them, because that damages the brand of the business and the individuals they've been interacting with very badly. And people talk.
So with that then, should we move on to the next stage of the process, which is interviews? So you talked about the screening. Would that class that as a first stage interview?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. I mean, it's great if you are using an agency, because we can really act as an extension of the business and really ask those questions, get them out of the first interview stage, because we're doing that. We know what the company's culture's like. We know the important things. It's not just about skills. It's about fitting in with the team, and we can sort all of that out because we have got that connection with the organisation. We know ultimately what the important things are. So it's definitely shortening the interview process.
So would you say the first stage then, would that be telephone, Teams, online rather than face-to-face initially?
Teams is the most popular. Telephone interviews are really hard because you've got no tangibility of the person. You can't see them. You can't judge their reactions. You can't pick up on body language. And whilst nothing takes the place of a face-to-face, in my opinion, a Teams meeting is a good way of a halfway house, because people are time-strapped. More and more people are back in the offices full-time, if not part-time. And it's not, you can't just go for a meeting and take a half day off without drawing attention or just not being able to have the time out. A Teams meeting is that middle ground where you can do it in a lunch break. You can finish early or you can start early. And it gives you that feeling of, do I vibe with this person? Have I got the right sort of skills? I've got one client who has the first stage, which is a Teams purely with the HR individual, but that person is the lifeblood of the business. So they are literally feeling out to see whether or not their ethos matches the candidate's ethos and what their plans are, match what the candidate wants. And then they have the hiring manager, which is also on Teams, but that's a much more technical meeting where it's kind of like, how do you do this? How do you do that? And then the final stage is much more of a, hi, how are you? This is us. This is what we want. Do you think we're you? Do you think you're us? That sort of thing.
Where there's where people live a long way away, and I deal with candidates who are in other countries, so many of the interviews, sometimes all stages are over Teams. So doing it for practical reasons as well, it's going to be very difficult to get this person down from Edinburgh to meet you. So let's have a really comprehensive first interview where we're getting a lot of the stuff covered that normally we might have brought into a second interview stage, because we're not going to drag this person down all the way from Edinburgh if we're not sure that they are quite likely going to be a good fit for the business. So I think that's a very interesting thing to look at with where your candidate is and how easy it is for them to attend an interview as well.
So would you say 3 stages is the average for an interview?
2.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know about you, Anne, but I've had candidates before, sometimes 6, 7, 8 interviews, which is just be overkill. When we can't have certain people there at the same time on Teams calls or in person, and then it's, we want you to meet this person, to meet that person.
Yeah.
So drawn out, and appreciate a lot of people have to be involved with the interview stages, but we're making it very, very hard for candidates when we start taking it past 3 interviews. Really.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point then. So you've both sort of touched on it. Who do you invite to these 2 interviews then? Do you have that HR person and the hiring manager? Do you invite the team so they can get a vibe of who they're going to be working with?
Usually I find the example I gave earlier, that tends to be more HR and the hiring manager in the first stage. And then the second stage, if it is a 2-stage process, would be the hiring manager and perhaps their boss or maybe a C-suite person. But I think it's becoming more prevalent these days for team meets, just to go in, say hi. I had a process recently where it was first stage on Teams, second stage in the office, had the senior management team doing the first part of the second stage, and then met with a couple of the peers in the team. And that was just in a canteen environment, so a bit more relaxed. But they'd done the main part in the first interview. The second part was to make sure that it's still all meshed. But then the meeting of the team was just more also not only for the team, but for them to think, could I work with these people? Are these the sort of people I could see myself with 37 and a half, however long a week?
Yeah, I like that approach.
And the face-to-face made it so much more relaxed, because if you are meeting the team on Teams, it's actually quite intimidating, I think, because you can't pick up on body language. And if somebody sat like that, I sit like this because it's comfortable, so not because I'm being defensive. But if you see somebody like that on Teams, you'll be thinking, oh gosh, they don't want to see.
Yeah. A lot of the interviews that I get arranged, I mean, they're for people that are going to go and work in labs. So in most cases, they're going to get a lab tour where they're probably getting taken around by technicians and things like that, which gives the candidate and obviously the rest of the team to really engage on a more personal level. And it's a lot easier just to have a walk around and, what's that over there? And same as some of the office interviews. I mean, I know when we've interviewed people coming into our office saying, look, we've got a dog over here, and come and do you like dogs? And just showing a little bit more of what the vibe is like. I've actually got one client who they're not based on a bus route. So they very, very kindly volunteered to go and pick up candidates from the local rail station, or they'll arrange a taxi if they can't, but they try to pick them up and give them a lift. And I always say to candidates, this is a really nice opportunity for you to have a little bit more of a relaxed part of the interview, and let your real personality come out. So I think that's really nice when clients are able to help out and give that personal side and see another dimension of the candidate.
But that's why people are going to pick that business over another business. It'll be the interpersonal fit, and if they don't like it, it's not casting aspersions on the business. It's just maybe it's just not the right gel fit, whatever. But it's very rare when you have a meet the team situation that people who go into that are an absolute, oh my gosh, what am I doing here scenario. And it's actually rare and very awkward if people do say after they've had that, no, it's not for me. It has happened,
But so timings then for interview stage, whether it's 1, 2 or potentially 3, what are we talking, a week in between days? Like how long should we be?
As quick as possible.
Quick as you can.
Okay, so as quick as you can. And what about in between different candidates? How many candidates should you interview at first stage, second stage? And what's the, because obviously availability is a factor here. So maybe candidate A is available on Monday, but candidate B is not available until Friday. So candidate A's got to wait until Friday per se. What's your advice there?
Well, when you take a brief from a client, I mean, obviously this is them potentially not using us, but how dare they?
So with us on the recruitment agents.
But I think wherever possible, we get a timeline. So we'll say, how urgent is it? How critical? How quickly do you want to recruit? Have you got slots that you can, blank out an afternoon, or can you take Friday to do interviews? How quickly can you turn it around in finance? You're restricted by month end. So this time of the month is always a lot busier. So they're less likely to be able to set aside a whole afternoon for an interview process. But you can't leave weeks between. The only time that it's ever acceptable is when you can say to a candidate, right, I'm sending you CV over now, but they're on holiday for 2 weeks. And if it's the summer holidays, you usually do have a bit more leeway because everybody's in the same boat at some stage during that 6-week period. But if you are leaving it 1 week to 2 weeks and then you say, oh, we want to get somebody back, got a situation where a client is, we're going to make a decision by the end of this week, and then has come back and said, we want to do another interview. And in the meantime, that person has found another role. And that happens. But actually, when you look at the process, it's been 3.5 weeks for what is a relatively junior role. And that's not realistic. And if they get lucky and the candidates are still available, it almost sets the precedent, which is going to set people up for failure. Because if I were taking a brief up, or when I take a brief on, I would hope that it will be wrapped up in 2 weeks. A few days to get CVs across, review the CVs, get the slots, and then second stage interviews, you would hope that would be done within 3 or 4 working days, if not less.
Okay.
It's not always the case, and some of the processes I'm working with at the moment are very long. Typically, when you're working with academics, for example, there's not the rush that there is in the commercial work. I guess it's all a bit like dating, isn't it? You go on the first date, and if it's a good date, how quickly do you expect to get a second date and ask for a second?
It's a good analogy. I like that.
You don't want to be too keen.
And again, I want to bring up the subject of travelling. It's very, very difficult for people who are up in Scotland or in Spain to come and do a face-to-face because so many logistical things to get round. And it brings up the question that I'm often faced with, and that's whether clients should refund interview expenses, which is it's always a topic. Some people think that they should, others not so. We all know the price of fuel and how for some people, just can't afford to come to an interview, Jen. I can't afford the train journey or the plane journey. Are they going to pay for that? And for them to then really get invested in it, in a job that they might not get.
Yeah.
If they've spent £200 travelling all the way down to Cambridge. So we've got all of those factors to look at as well.
That's interesting. So what about the feedback then from interviews? How long should they wait if they've had like the screening or the first interview? Should they tell them straight away? The second, do they have to wait for all the candidates to be interviewed? Like what do you think they should do?
Usually people wait until they've seen everybody unless somebody is a standout. But be careful of setting yourself up for failure. If you come back within an hour of interviewing and then say, we really want to see this person, then a week and a half later you still haven't booked in the second stage interview, that's an issue. But also, it is a bit like the dating thing. You don't want to be too keen because it can spook people. It almost can make you look a bit desperate if you go back to them immediately. It's great if everybody is bouncing off the walls in the interview, doing a Tom Cruise situation. Brilliant. But if you are sensing a bit of reticence from the candidate, and I think people, as they get more experienced, are quite good at not putting across that they absolutely are in love with this job and they're not sure. Be wary of being too keen and giving off that air of desperation.
It's that dating thing again, isn't it? Beware of the body boilers.
Yeah. But I think you should always be speedy. And actually, in most interviews that I have, clients usually set the expectations. I'll have already done it wherever possible. But if, say, they're seeing a few people in one day, they'll say, right, we've got a few more interviews. We'll come back to you by Friday. The ideal client is one that says Friday and comes back by Thursday, because then they are overachieving. But don't say by Friday and then the following Wednesday you're still waiting. Yeah. Because if a candidate is on the fence, that's the best way to push them off the fence and make them think, I'm not interested.
Yeah, it works twofold though, doesn't it? Because 8 out of 10 times your candidates are talking to other people anyway. And so interviews are very much a two-way thing.
So phone call for that feedback? If you've actually had a screening or an interview, definitely phone call. Yeah.
I always speak to the candidates first wherever possible. So I can get a read on it, because people tend to know whether it's going well or not.
Immediately, if you can.
Or the vibe they feel, whether they like the vibe or they're not sure on the
exactly. As soon as they get in their car, I say, phone me up. Just let me know how it goes, and I want to get your instant reaction. And if they're really, really keen, that is when I often go back to the client and say, just call me straight after the interview. Love the team, and get that feedback.
So we've talked about CVs, we've talked about interviews. How about offers then? Firstly, how do clients know what to offer? Does it depend on the candidate and their experience? Do they have a blanket offer? Talk me through it.
They should hopefully have done some due diligence in advance. So not all companies advertise with salaries attached. I understand the reasoning behind it, but when you're doing the screening process, you want to make sure that the candidate is looking for the right sort of ballpark, that you're not going to get to the stage of saying you're the best person and they say, okay, thank you, I'd like £10,000 more than you've got in your budget. So they should know what they're looking for, and also suss out what they're looking for in terms of benefits, and whether the benefits match what they're able to provide. And it is about doing your homework. That is ultimately it, in my opinion. I think you have to always know where it's going to be pitched, and it's very rare that you will actually discuss the salary in an interview process. That might be dealt with by the MD if it's a small business at the end of the process, or it might be dealt with by a talent team, but it's almost an unwritten rule that you don't say in the second interview, oh, by the way, I'm looking for 45 grand. You don't do that, because you would hope that everybody knows you're in the right remit in terms of the financials. And therefore, when it comes to it, it's just nuancing the finer details, whether it's just maybe adding an extra £1,000, or we had a situation yesterday where the candidate wanted more holiday entitlement than the business can offer. So they've actually increased her salary slightly to make up for the fact that she will be able to afford to take a few days unpaid without upsetting the business apple cart and be seen to be taking a week's extra holiday than she actually is entitled to and the rest of the business isn't entitled to.
And we offer a benchmarking service here as well, don't we?
We do. Yeah. We do, yeah. So, I mean, we have salary guides, obviously, for our different divisions, and have got a number of different job titles in there where we've used a lot of data from last year to put together some salaries. But if there's anything more specific that people need help with, and in particular different geographical areas, we can always add some insights into that as well. So yeah, we do quite a bit of benchmarking.
We know what the market is doing, because one month to another, if you're recruiting in January, you're likely to be slightly more competitive versus if you're recruiting in December. And if you're saying to me that you need a management accountant and you want to pay 40,000, but you want certain characteristics such as a qualified, etc., my job is to say to you, you'll get this for that, or if you want to get that and you want everything on your wish list, you'll need to pay a bit extra. In our salary guide, it will give you a broad range. But where I recruit in Huntingdon is different to where Jen recruits in the centre of Cambridge. Obviously, we recruit different disciplines, but it's everything that goes with, because if you have to commute an hour each way every day, people are going to take that into consideration. But people want local roles, which is why I recruit in more rural areas. But our role is to give the clients the advice rather than just say, you'll get this person for that amount of money. There's a lot more to it than that.
And give them some different options. I know with scientific candidates, and I would say probably 8 out of 10 scientific candidates that I'm dealing with currently are on some kind of visa or need some kind of visa. Now, quite often, unable to be sponsored by a company, some candidates would forego some of their salary because that is the most important thing to them. So you could often, where postdocs are generally coming in 45k upwards, you could often get them quite a bit cheaper if you're willing to sponsor somebody, or you're actually able to do that. Same with people being able to have share options. Often that is, people see the long-term benefit of that and would be happier to take a lower salary. So we try to put that, I mean, I know in the scientific guide, I've got some of that information up there to help people.
So if people want to download our salary guide or find out more about benchmarking, then they need to go to our website under the Beyond Recruitment section.
Yeah.
So best way to communicate an offer then, would that be a telephone call followed by an email with all the details? And how quickly should the telephone call be first and then followed by that email? Should it be the same day?
If it's through a recruiter, if it's through us, the only recruiter, through us, I mean, as Anne said before, we would have done our homework. We know what people are likely to accept and where, there's that line when they absolutely wouldn't go under, say, 35k. So normally they would communicate that to us. And if they came in slightly lower at 30, 33k, we said, but thank you very much, but I know that my candidate isn't going to accept that. So you have to have a conversation with us, firstly, if you are going through an agency, definitely.
And that's one of the good things about the agency, isn't it, as a go-between, because you know what the client's range is and you know what the candidate's limit is, or the minimum that they want is. So it's good because as a go-between to find that right balance as well.
And when we put people forward, we will put them forward as a minimum requirement. And there's no better way to turn a candidate off than to lowball them. So if they say, I'm looking for 35 and the client says, oh, we'll pay you 32, that makes the candidate feel devalued from the outset, because they've interviewed them, they've gone through the whole process knowing that their expectations are X, and then they offer Y. And sometimes, going back a couple of years, clients would say, well, they haven't got a job, so they should be happy with it.
Yeah. Goalposts are always being moved from both sides. What Anne and I probably spend quite a bit of time doing is sometimes if a client does lowball, as we call it, we're able to have a chat with them and say, look, you need to look at the bigger picture here. This is going to give you this, it's going to give you that, it's going to give you development. And then obviously let's look at the benefits and get them to see past the salary a little bit and into things like culture, benefits and progression. So where a candidate would normally go, nope, not taking 33, I would have 35. we're often to help them see the woods from the trees and mitigate that slightly lower salary a little bit.
So timings then, what do you think after you've interviewed all your candidates? When would you...
Well, you set out your timeline to the candidate, trying to exceed it, trying to overachieve on what you've said. So if you see somebody today and you say, we'll come back to you by Friday, if you know that person is the one you want to offer them today, offer them tomorrow, as soon as you can, as soon as you've got the approved figure, call them. Don't ever just do it on email. That happens more often than I care to admit, and I do not like that. Talk them through the offer, be excited, show the enthusiasm to have them joining, because they're still talking to an individual. You're not just talking to a set of skills. And follow up quickly. I've had clients who have offered verbally and then 2-3 weeks later have still not sent out the contract. And one candidate actually was so worried that they had been offered but hadn't received the paperwork, they ended up interviewing for other roles because they kept giving the client the heads up. I'm waiting, but got embarrassing, so they stopped asking, then secured their own interviews, and then the client sent the offer out and got funny with the candidate when they said, sorry, I'm joining somewhere else. So do it quickly. Just follow through on that statement of intent. We want you. This is why we want you. This is what we can offer you. Because then also you can, in return, ask that they are coming back to you quite quickly.
Yeah, well, that was my next question. How long do you then wait for the candidate to accept or reject the offer? And then I have a whole flurry of questions now. Do you counter offer the candidate? Or what do you do if they've had a counter offer and then they come back to you, whether they're interviewing elsewhere or whether it's their current company? But also, my third question is, do you reject the other candidates, or do you wait until the offer's been accepted by the first pick, and then if it's rejected, then you offer the second pick, if you understand my question?
Yeah, this is where our job gets really, really interesting. And we're able to look at all those different scenarios, and with our experience, we're able to advise people on what to do best. I think your first question was around counter offers.
Yeah.
Often, people say, yeah, that's great, I verbally accept, and then they go back and hand their notice in or speak to their manager, and then, no, stay where I am. They've just offered me another £2,000 to stay, or I've got a job title to it. And then this is where things start to get really, really interesting.
But we go through the counter offer process at the beginning
At stage
of
one.
any registration, of any meeting with a candidate, because a good candidate is going to be kept hold of wherever possible. If it's a financial thing, I think I've said this in a podcast before actually, if it's a financial reason that somebody's looking for a job, the first thing I do is send them back to their manager and say, ask for more money.
Okay.
Because they probably are underpaid. If they are underpaid, then I would say you should go back. If they're told, no, there's no more money, fine, then we'll find you another role. But pound to a penny, that they will turn around and say, when they resign, we'll give you the money that we suddenly have managed to find that we couldn't find for you 3 months ago. So counter offers are a massive issue. They used to be restricted to certain areas of the market in finance, but now they're across the board. But also the other challenge that an employer faces is offering them the 35 that they wanted, and the candidate, having interviewed at a few other businesses, realising that actually they could perhaps get up to 40,000, and they say, yeah, I don't want that now, I want 37.5 or 40. And the client, from their perspective, needs to look at whether or not the value that the candidate will bring to the business, their fit, everything is worth that, because that, again, is where our value really steps in, because we play that third party. We act for the client and the candidate. So we don't actually have any vested interest in one over the other. I know a lot of candidates think that we only care about clients, and actually without them, we have no clients.
Yeah.
So we will play both sides. But if somebody says to me, I wanted 35 and now I want 60, my job is to say to them, you might want it, but I also want $1 million. And with all due respect for this role, that salary is a fair salary. Or I'll try and get you a bit more, but I'm not going to suddenly increase your salary by 20 grand.
It can sometimes become like a bidding war. I don't know about you, Anne, but sometimes I could feel a bit like an auctioneer. And I really believe Anne's right, and it's covering that off at the first stage. Why you're looking to leave? It's financial. And then when you get to that, talking to them around the interview stage and making sure that they're prepared, it's okay, so this is the salary that we're looking at. Now tell me, what would you accept? What's the minimum that you would accept? 40 grand. Okay, so if they come back and offer you 38 grand, you're telling me you wouldn't accept it. Oh, no, actually I might do. And then for us, in our heads, we need to know where that line is so that when the offer comes through, we don't have to keep going back and forth. We know, because we know what they're looking for. We've really ironed that out with them before we even get to that stage.
And too much negotiation can sully the relationship. So before they even start, there's a bit of a black cloud hanging over that person. Mm-hmm. But also, if it is purely based around money and they've gone back to them, I also have to say to the candidate, I know when you leave, they will give you more money. How do you feel about that? And most people can see that counter offers are destined to not make you stay in a business.
Yeah.
They will for a short period, because faced with an extra £5,000 or getting an extra 5 to go to another business, which is quite a scary prospect. It's quite intimidating. They'll probably think, I'll stay where I am.
Yeah.
Within 3-6 months, they'll be looking again anyway.
There are some stats somewhere that I've got which tells you, how successful counter offers actually are and how many people end up leaving within 6 months. The grass is always greener as well, isn't it?
But the legend of this story is use an agency and then you don't have to do all this stuff.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
We can do it for you.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, well, brilliant. That kind of brings us to the end of our first part of the perfect recruitment process journey. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we say goodbye to our listeners?
No?
Thanks for listening. And thank you very much. And we'll catch you in part 2.
That's a wrap for this week's episode. If you want to be our next guest speaker on TOGCast, then get in touch with the One Group. And don't forget to subscribe. We would hate for you to miss the next one.